It's hard to deny the effectiveness and clever design of the Alabama rig. The Alabama rig is a scaled down jig head, which have spinner blades and soft plastics with hooks attached. So you have a very lightweight, in this case, shad imitation jig head, and then your 4 wire arms and one running straight back to that last soft plastic. These are a little more rigid than you would expect them to be because they are designed to be cast. Your traditional saltwater umbrella rig is heavy and it's trolled behind the boat. These you are designed to cast. So the entire system needs to be robust, but still light enough that you're not going to break your gear trying to cast it out. Now, are these really illegal? No. However, depending on the state that you live in, there are rules as to how many hooks you can have on a rig. So some of your larger or more complex Alabama rigs would not be allowed in those states. In the professional and angler circuit, bass tournaments and the like, Alabama rig is most often banned. Regardless of where you stand on the tournaments, it's hard to deny the effectiveness and clever design of the Alabama rig. So we are rigging our Alabama rig right out of the box today. We're starting with the Yum Flash Mob Jr. And let's get this guy squared away. Yes, in hindsight, I could have opened this beforehand. However, kind of like an unboxing video now. In this case, we are going for a soft plastic trailer that resembles baitfish. These could be changed out depending on the season for larger profile, smaller profile, or grubs as well. It's kind of a mess when you get it out of the box, but that's half the fun of setting these rigs up. So there you go with the umbrella style frame. And as you can see here, we've got these Flash Mob Jr. willow leaf blades in silver, and you've got a pretty heavy barrel swivel to snap for your connection to your jig heads. These jig heads are what are called twist locks. So you see that little corkscrew that we have right there? So you are going to have to kind of spiral that guy onto it, and that's going to keep it from sliding down the hook. So here's how I like to rig a twist lock jig head with my soft plastic. First thing I do is I kind of measure out where that hook is supposed to come out the top or back side of the plastic. And I'll usually make just a little hole or incision that I can find later. And then you're going to thread it on the same way that you always do. Point first into the nose, pop out at that predetermined hole that we marked, slide it down the hook shank, and now you're going to get to that little corkscrew or twist lock. Make sure you bend that tail down and twist. Otherwise, the hook point is going to end up cutting the soft plastic, and you're going to end up with a much shorter bait than you wanted. You see it's cinching its way down as it threads into that soft plastic. And there you go. And that's not going to slide off that hook point or jig head. So now that we have our jig headed soft plastics squared away there, and we have our unrigged Alabama rig, it would be really tempting to throw these little guys on here. But what I recommend doing first is, if you are tying straight to your main line, do that first, because otherwise you're going to be contending with a whole bunch of hooks here. I am using spider wire 50-pound braid. You could easily go up to 60-pound braid, 65-pound. If you are using a heavier Alabama rig than this is a 3/8, but they do come even heavier. And they do make some lighter options as well. This was kind of a nice middle. But we are going to tie directly to our main line because we want as little risk of losing this rig as possible, and the best ability to, ensure a good hook set and free it should it get hung up on the bottom, because this rig is going to sink very fast. We are going to try a Palomar knot on this one because I don't have a hook to contend with right now. And we're going to trim that tag end off of there. And you are going to be good to go. Now, time to attach your soft plastics. It's really hard not to call these jigs, but in the way that they're being fished right now, they're not necessarily jigs. And they are just components of this rig all together. And it should be noted, and you'll probably see this again when we're out fishing, that since these are wire arms on this rig, set to a lead jig head, that you may need to adjust them, bend them out a little bit, especially after the package, because this is going to be a very narrow presentation swimming through the water. Let's talk about the gear that you need to fish an Alabama rig. This rig is pretty heavy. There's only about 3/8 of an ounce worth of lead and steel on this rig, but the soft plastics do add some weight, and the entire rig has a fair amount of drag to it. So you definitely do not want to be using light gear with this rig. This is currently affixed with a Palomar knot directly to 50-pound spider wire in moss green. A lot of people, especially if they're fishing heavier rigs or in heavier cover, go up to a 65-pound braid. You're not going to go wrong with that option as well. I have a 6.6 medium casting rod, and this is light for this setup. It's probably at about the maximum effectiveness for this rod, but it does work. Going to a 7 or a 7.6 is going to give you much better leverage, much better casting distance, and a heavier action is going to allow you to impart more force on your hook set, more energy into your cast. It's not going to tire you out because you're going to be using the mechanical advantage of the rod rather than your wrists. I am using a relatively slow retrieve gear ratio here. This is a 6.4 to 1. That is my sweet spot, but you could certainly go to a even slower retrieve speed and bulk up the size of your reel. This Lose Speed spool has about 85 yards of line on it with this 50. If you upsized your reel to a classic swim bait style, whether that be a Shimano Tranx or a Daiwa Alexa, something beefier designed to be retrieving and constantly pulling in those heavy baits, that would be just about perfect. You'd have a lot of line capacity, great gear ratios so that you can control that speed and keep it even and low to the bottom. Because that's where this rig really wants to work, is down low in the water column where those bass are targeting schools of bait. One of the places where the Alabama rig excels is in areas where you have high concentrations of bait fish. For instance, at the base of this waterfall / dam, there's flowing water here and there's a deep riverbed, and this rig excels in fishing deep.
When fishing the Alabama rig, the goal is to imitate a school of panicked baitfish. The willow leaf blades, as well as the paddle tails, are already going to give off a lot of vibration and a lot of flash. So a constant retrieve is usually all that's needed. However, a quick pause or pop of the rod tip every few cranks will cause the entire rig to shift its position in the water column and can look like that school is reacting to the presence of that predatory fish.
We're out here in a deeper section of the lake, one that you might be familiar with. You've seen some of the other videos. You've a deep rocky gully here where those bass like to hang out, especially because your bait fish get pinned up against these boulders on the shoreline. The Alabama rig is phenomenal for places with cover. I wouldn't recommend it for weed beds because you're going to impair the action too much. However, with those wire guards all the way around, you can bounce this over a boulder field or stump bed if you need to. So don't be afraid to throw it out there in areas that you might be scared to throw some other baits. And this section is deep, so we are going to let it sink and reel very slowly, just enough to keep everything fluttering. Now, when you get a hit on this rig, it's going to come like a freight train. So when that happens, don't be afraid to put some power behind your hook set. And note how I'm doing that lasso cast, bringing it back and then swinging it forward, letting the momentum of that rig do a lot of the work for me. If you're trying to just overhand and chuck this rig out over and over and over again, you're going to get real tired. And if you don't, I don't want to arm wrestle you. Now, because this is a bait that we want to keep low and relatively slow, you can go for a much lower gear ratio on your conventional. Right here, I've got my standard lose, which is a 6.4 to 1. If you were planning on making the Alabama rig a go-to, I would suggest going even lower than that and beefing up the size of your spool. You'll get more capacity in your line, and also it's just going to be a lot more pleasant for you to continually crank something like a big Lexa or Shimano Tranx or something in that range. I'm using a 6.6 because I shrunk my gear down for travel. However, a longer 7.5 foot rod with a heavy action is really what you want to do. This isn't something that you're going to be placing delicate baits anywhere. You're going to want to have a nice heavy stick to maximize your hook set, maximize your casting, and not beat yourself and your gear up. That longer rod is also going to give you a little bit more leverage in your casting. All right, folks. So here's what just happened to me. So I returned to one of my favorite spots here to try my rig one more time, and I hooked into one of the better bass I have caught on. Landed it and realized that the SD card on this GoPro was full and my phone had died, so I couldn't delete any of the old or kind of scrap video. So I released the bass, ran back to the car, plugged my phone in, got enough battery life that I could pop the GoPro open and delete all of the old footage that we've already uploaded and used. So now I'm gonna try to go back there and record all of it on this point of view camera. What a fisherman's story, huh? All right, guys. So one thing you do want to pay attention to is making sure your Alabama rig doesn't get twisted up. That can happen when you set it down. So just double check every time you get ready to cast. I see a lot of bait fish down here. So we're going to cast it out, work it back, and see what happens. The most important thing when you're casting this, because it is such a heavy rig, is you want to do a circle and then lob. Try to keep it low to the water so you're not bombing it. That's going to make a really big splash if you cast it way high. So here we go. Kind of going to go back and out. You can let it sink a little, and then a slow, steady retrieve. You're going to want to keep your rod tip low to the water here as well. A little snap of the rod tip can help straighten everything out if there's a little kink in your rig. A lot of flash, a lot of vibration,